For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. The Tennessee Oilers did just about everything wrong when they moved from Houston to Tennessee and tried to integrate themselves into the city and feel like the home team. I could talk about this in depth, but I'm not going to harp too much on this, simply because a few years ago, UrinatingTree put out an incredible video about the Tennessee Oilers and their first season there, and just how much of a disaster the 1997 season was for them in Memphis, where they got no fan support whatsoever and did just about everything wrong. It's an incredible half-hour-long video, so if you get a chance, go check that out and see for yourself just how bad the Oilers were when they first moved from an off-the-field perspective. To make a long story short, nothing went right. The fans didn't feel connected to the team because the name Oilers had nothing to do with Tennessee, with constant cries for the team to change the name being ignored. The fans didn't feel connected to the team because some operations were still in Houston, and because the team was playing in Memphis, even though that was on the opposite side of the state, and the Oilers were just going to abandon Memphis like every other failed NFL project in the city to go to Nashville once the new stadium was built. The Liberty Bowl was a horrible venue for games, and not only did no fans show up, but there was once a story from a mid-November game, I kid you not, of hundreds of tickets being left in a box outside the stadium by mistake from a worker, and not one person noticing or doing anything with the tickets. Not one person who walked by even cared that there were just hundreds of tickets available for free. Long story short, the Oilers were a joke. However, what's not a joke is the fact that we are so close to 60,000 subscribers. So if you want to help us get there, and you want to learn more about the weird and wacky history of the NFL, then be sure to hit that like button down below, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss a single video that we post, or a single time that we go live on the channel, because we go live a lot. Thanks in advance for your support as we try and grow this community to 60,000 subs and beyond. However, as great as UrinatingTree's video was on the Oilers, and as in-depth as it was about all the disasters that took place, there was one that was not mentioned that has been forgotten about nearly 3 decades later, and might legitimately be the worst of the bunch. Because when it came to this team right here that you've been watching this whole time in the Tennessee Oilers, the people in charge lacked a basic understanding of science and common sense. Because in 1997, for more than half the season, there was a major technological issue that was plaguing the Oilers. And you're not going to believe just how stupid this entire situation was. Because if anything summed up just how rushed and how awful the move of the Oilers was at first from Houston to Tennessee, it was this incident right here. Because this is the story behind the forgotten disaster of the 1997 Tennessee Oilers. Before I talk about the actual disaster in question, and just how stupid it was, we need some context to understand what every team in the NFL, including the Oilers, was doing at the time. By the time 1997 rolled around, it had become incredibly commonplace for coaches to be able to communicate with their quarterbacks in the middle of the game. In 1994, a helmet radio system was used so that coaches upstairs in the box could signal in plays to the quarterbacks through the helmet. Each quarterback helmet had an 8-ounce speaker by the ear hole that allowed for a coach to talk directly to a quarterback to let them know what play to call. Even though this communication is one way, and the quarterback can't talk back to the offensive coordinator, whether that coach is in the box upstairs or on the sideline, this was an absolute game changer for the quarterback. No longer would he have to call his own plays. No longer would someone have to relay the play in from the sideline. Instead, the coach could just talk directly to the quarterback and signal everything that the quarterback was supposed to do here. The system would shut off with 15 seconds left on the play clock so that the offense wouldn't have so much of an advantage, and so that the quarterback would still be responsible for making the appropriate audibles and adjustments at the line. But this was still an absolute game changer nonetheless. And for the most part, this system worked well, and is still being used today. Yes, there were some issues with it, as was to be expected, especially in the 1990s, when FM radio really began to boom, to the point where the number of FM stations around by the late 90s was nearly double what it was just 20 years before, meaning that since all radio operates on frequency and wavelengths, there were some interference issues with the NFL team station frequencies being a bit too close to the stations of other networks. And there were some other technological issues too, regarding the sound going out and the speaker system not working. But for the most part, teams were able to communicate through this device without too much issue. This was, by and large, a net positive. However, for whatever reason, the team that you've been watching this entire time, as in the Tennessee Oilers, yeah, the system was not working. Control Dynamics was the company that operated these systems across the NFL. But while they didn't have a ton of issues with some of the other teams, with the Oilers, this system was about as effective as me trying to put together a 1,000-piece puzzle with half of the pieces missing. Obviously, this was a problem for a few reasons. Number one, it was just a bad look for Control Dynamics and for the NFL to have a product that doesn't work, especially when it's constant. Number two, in the interest of fairness, an NFL rule existed that said that when the system didn't work for one team, it automatically shut off for the other. So this meant that for any games involving the Oilers, no team would be able to use the system. And that was kind of a problem. And for the Oilers, who had a system where offensive coordinator Les Steckel relayed the plays to wide receivers coach Alan Lowry, who then relayed the plays to quarterback Steve McNair in his helmet, and now they couldn't use this system because the Control Dynamics product wasn't working, this screwed things up for them and made it incredibly wonky to say the least. Now, the Oilers were having issues with this all season, but things picked up especially over their team's most recent home game, a 28-14 win against Washington. Even though the Oilers won the game, they did it in spite of the technology, as the system failed completely, forcing the Oilers to burn multiple timeouts in the first quarter, well before they would have liked. Finally, 8 games into the season, at the midway point of the year, the Oilers decided that enough was enough, and they needed someone from Control Dynamics to come by and fix the problem. I don't know what took them this long to do it, but better late than never, I suppose. And do you want to know what the problem was? Do you want to know why, for roughly half the season, things didn't work, and why the Oilers were one of the only teams having constant issues with their communication system? Well, before I tell you, let's talk about basic science for one quick second. FM radio wavelengths are incredibly short. The higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelengths. And FM radio's wavelengths operate at a higher frequency, meaning that they have short wavelengths. And this means that FM radio covers less ground than other types of radio. You know this if you've ever driven in a car for a long period of time. Let's say you're in New York and you're listening to Z100.3. You're able to hear the music on the radio perfectly. Now, drive down to Philadelphia and try listening to that same station, and you won't be able to. All you'll get is either static, or you'll get an entirely different radio station. Because FM radio covers such a short distance, there are hundreds of stations across the country operating on the same frequency, but not interfering with each other. There can be a station that's 100.3 in New York, and a station that's 100.3 in Dallas, and a station that's 100.3 in Los Angeles, and they'll never interfere with each other despite operating on the same frequency. Conversely, there might be 100.3 in New York, but not 100.3 in Charlotte. It's not like there's one frequency for the entire country. There's hundreds of stations on the same frequency that got a license from the FCC to operate there because it wouldn't interfere with other radio signals elsewhere. And again, you don't necessarily need to know the science behind it. You just know this from common sense and from driving anywhere. You know this from intuition, whether you realize it or not. It's almost like over-the-air television. You don't need to know the science behind how it works, but you know that Channel 2 in New York is different from Channel 2 in Atlanta, and that's different from Channel 2 in Houston. So with all of that in mind, take a wild guess as to why the Oilers couldn't get things working for half the season. Yep, that's right. They never changed the radio frequency when they moved from Houston to Tennessee. Seriously, whatever radio frequency they were operating on in Houston, they got a license from the FCC to do it, and it was an unoccupied frequency. However, when they moved to Tennessee, they just left it on the same frequency, thinking that things would be fine, even though it was a completely new market, and even though there was another station that was on the same frequency, which kind of made things tough from an interference standpoint. Said General Manager Floyd Reese, "The frequencies are the ones we used in Houston, and that may be the trouble, because they may not be clear here." Gee, you think? You never realized that? No one stopped to think, for 1 second, hey, let's make sure we're on a frequency that isn't occupied since we're switching locations. How did no one think of this? Better yet, how did no one think of this for half the season? How did it take until the end of October for someone to realize that this could pose a problem? Did no one, not one person involved with the organization, have a favorite radio station when they were in Houston and they had to find a different radio station when they moved to Tennessee because the signal wasn't picked up for obvious reasons? It's baffling. Absolutely baffling. This is like the equivalent of being late every single time you have an event because you now live in New York and you used to live in Chicago. And you didn't realize until a few months after you got there that the only reason you were late was because you forgot to move your clock up an hour. Like, this is extremely basic stuff when moving, which is something that just about everyone in the organization, whether it was for college, or for work, or for family-related reasons, or for some other thing, had to do at some point. Not in terms of changing the frequencies to this very specific system, but in terms of adjusting things. Because what worked in one location, like picking up a signal to one particular radio station, didn't work in another. How no one, not one person, until half the season was done, thought to change the frequency to something that wasn't occupied and to change it from what they had in Houston to something new that would work without any interference blows my mind. But that's the 1997 Tennessee Oilers for you. Incompetent at just about every turn. And once someone from Control Dynamics came in to visit this team behind me right here and told them, "Hey, you guys are idiots. You forgot to change the frequency," everything seemed to work out all right. Once the Oilers finally got on a frequency that was not the same as the one they had in Houston and was an unoccupied frequency where there was no interference whatsoever, everything worked out all right. Who would have thought? Who would have possibly thought that the frequency in Houston is different from the frequency in Memphis? Now, the Oilers did move from Memphis to Nashville in 1998, and from everything I could tell, they remembered to change the frequency again when they did that, because the stations you get in Memphis are different from the stations you get in Nashville, 200 miles away. You live and you learn, even if it was way later than it should have been. So what's the moral of the story here? If you're going to move, look at what the Tennessee Oilers did when moving from Houston to Tennessee, and then do the exact opposite. However, on a more specific note, the moral is to change your FM radio presets when you move from one spot to another, or when you're driving from one location to another. Of course, you do that naturally and instinctively once you realize that all you're getting is static and white noise, or the station that usually plays top 40 pop music is now playing Latin music now that you're 500 miles away from where it used to be. But somehow, a multi-million-dollar organization didn't do this, and didn't stop to think for 1 second until it was the second half of the year and we were past the point of no return. Because in 1997, for the better part of the season, thanks to their own stupidity, the helmet communication device was the same as the entire move to Tennessee in the first place from an off-the-field perspective in Memphis. It just wasn't working. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.